Have you ever had funny moments when someone didn't suspect that you understood their language? I am an American, but I know a little Russian. A few years ago I was in St. Petersburg. I decided to take a boat ticket to Peterhof. All the signs are in Russian, so I figured out the prices without any problems. But it was obvious that I was not a local, and the saleswoman decided to play on this. I offered tickets 3 times more expensive. To which I replied directly in Russian, but the sign says that the ticket costs so much. Her reaction was ridiculous. In general, this is a typical story for Russia, where prices are the same for locals and different for tourists. We had a Chinese eatery near the campus. Everyone spoke Chinese, but I always communicated with them in English because I was embarrassed by my accent. I usually ordered rice with meat. One day I only went to get meat, because rice was already at home. I hear the cashier yelling in Chinese, "This is a fat horse, there will only be meat without rice." I decided to answer in Chinese to show that I understand. Since then, they've always given me a supplement. And they didn't even take money for that order. I lived in South Korea for 3 years, but I hardly learned Korean. But I met an American woman, whom everyone considered not local because of her American accent. The teachers didn't even think she knew Korean and were rude to her face. She put up with it for a year, until at graduation she remembered that she was called a foreign pig. One of the teachers just started crying. I wish I could have seen it. When I was working at McDuck, I was surrounded by Spanish-speaking colleagues. They didn't know that I knew Spanish. Sometimes they were rude to me in Spanish, but I pretended that I did not understand. One day the manager told me that he was appreciated more because he knows 2 languages. I told him in Spanish that I knew 3 of them. He's just freaking out. Once, 2 Swiss women sat on the bus and discussed Latinos. One asked the other if her friend thought I was handsome. I couldn't stand it and turned around. "Yes, I'm interested too." It was just funny to see their reaction. And here's another thing. I am an American expat in Thailand with a big beard. Locals often don't realize that I understand them. One day, a couple of teenagers just bombarded me with comments about a monkey. I stopped and looked at them. 2 young girls, about 14 years old, started yelling at me. Running around, screaming, infuriating, like I'm a monkey. I decided to deal with them. I looked them straight in the eye and asked, "What, do you always have fun commenting on the appearance of passers-by?" And when he saw their frightened faces, he added, "Maybe you should think about what words you choose when you say them to passers-by." And so, when I finished my speech, they suddenly froze, as if discouraged. Then I just walked away, leaving them alone. After thinking for a second, I added, "And remember, words can leave a mark not only on you, but also on those whom you offend." And without waiting for an answer, I continued on my way. While I was in Germany, my English teacher friend invited me to school for a lesson. She introduced me to the students, and I greeted her, saying that I was from the USA. My friend suggested that the students ask me questions in English. Then one guy at the desk decided to make a joke in German, thinking that it would stay between them. He said something like, "Americans are dumb." The teacher blushed and the students laughed. To defuse the situation, I said in German, "Yes, many Americans speak German." The guy was in shock, like a child who accidentally got on stage during a concert. He really didn't expect me to understand German. Once my friends and I went to the mall. While I was trying on clothes, 2 shop workers stood next to me and discussed me in Spanish. They called me a dumb Greek, unaware that I understood Spanish because of my Spanish roots. When I came out of the fitting room and answered them in Spanish, they just burned with surprise and shame. My aunt and I were flying to a resort on vacation. She was in a wheelchair because of a broken leg. At the airport, a German couple said terrible things about her, not knowing that we both speak German. My aunt politely replied to them, and the man blushed with shame. I lived in London and got into funny situations. One day I accidentally bumped into a guy on the subway, and we were apologizing in English. Then I enjoyed the situation for 5 minutes while he told a friend in Spanish what a fat horse I was. When I came out, I told them in Spanish that their jokes were offensive. They were in shock. My stepmother looks like a white Italian woman, but speaks Japanese. One day she went with her friends to a beauty salon where Japanese people worked. They started making fun of her, not knowing that she understood them. But my stepmother answered them in Japanese, and they fell silent, realizing that they were in an awkward situation. And here's another funny story. I'm walking down the street and two little Japanese girls are screaming that I'm hot and blue-eyed. My self-esteem is going up. But when I turn around, it turns out that they meant someone else. And here's another story. I was walking with a German friend in Italy. I warned him in German, "Bro, don't pour shit on people, you never know who understands here. Let's go like this," and next to us is a woman. She adds, "JSC, for example, I'm LOL. What was it, XS?" Once, after drinking, my friend and I took a taxi home. We didn't have much money, so we offered the other two women to share a taxi. They agreed. We're driving, and suddenly they start speaking Swedish. Even though I understand Swedish, I was so drunk that I didn't care about anything. And suddenly they refused to pay for a taxi. I suggest telling the driver, but they say, "Until these two ladies give up half, don't let them out." The driver took the hint, and they still had to pay. In Korea, I was invited for a haircut, and the hairdresser's assistant accidentally turned to the hairdresser, calling me, "this one." When I heard them talking in Korean, I joked that I didn't know that this salon only serves princesses. They apologized and didn't make fun of me anymore. I also remember a case when I was suddenly stopped on the subway in Japan and started asking for an autograph, thinking that I was an American star. I was completely at a loss, but I signed up anyway. I didn't want to offend them. By the way, once in Thailand I came across a group of tourists who thought I was an American and started communicating with me in English. I decided to play a joke and answered them in heavily accented English, pretending that I didn't understand very well. They were having fun, and I was watching their reaction. There are funny situations in everyday life. For example, when I was buying groceries in Japan, the cashier, seeing me, decided that I did not understand the local currency, and began to brazenly profit from me. I told her in perfect Japanese that she was wrong, and she was shocked. These moments make my travels even more interesting. Once, when I was in Germany, I was only 22 years old, but I looked so young that one girl in the queue accidentally said that I looked like a baby. I asked her what kind of baby I looked like, and she felt very ashamed. She immediately ran away. But in the end, I realized that the ability to understand Korean helped me establish contact with her, and we continued to communicate in Korean. When I was living in London, I had a funny situation on the subway. I was driving home after work and there was a huge crowd of fans on the subway going to a football match between Chelsea and Barcelona. At some point, the subway stopped abruptly, and I bumped one of the fans a little. After apologizing in English, I heard him start telling his friend in Spanish that he clearly thought I didn't understand. Something like, "I wish that fat boy wasn't hanging out." I turned to them and replied in Spanish, "Yes, I think so too." Their reaction was just funny. They immediately froze, as if in shock. And one more incident from my life in Japan. One day I was walking down the street, and I heard the girls saying, "Oh, look how handsome. And with blue eyes." My self-esteem just jumped at that moment. I turned to look at them and found two small Japanese schoolgirls who were probably 13 years old or even younger. Apparently, to them I looked like an ordinary foreigner, and they did not expect me to understand them. It was a pretty funny moment. When I worked at a mall in the USA, many customers preferred to discuss their purchases in Spanish, thinking that I, looking like a typical white American, did not understand them. One day, when I brought the goods to the checkout for payment, two women at the checkout started joking about my choices in Spanish, calling me a bad customer, and so on. When I politely looked away and answered them in Spanish that I had already made a choice and I did not need their help, their faces instantly turned red with shame. This moment was really funny, and I hope they won't make assumptions about their customers so easily anymore. One day, while on a tourist trip in another country, I heard a couple who were actively discussing passers-by on the street. They assumed that none of them understood their language. However, when I walked past them, I replied to their comments in the same language. Their faces were truly insane when they realized that they had been exposed and quieted down. In one of the stores, I heard a couple discussing the products on the shelves. They reviewed the goods and criticized their quality in their native language. When I came up to ask a question about the product, they were completely shocked when I addressed them in the same language. Their attempt to hide their displeasure was unsuccessful and instead led to ridiculous and clumsy apologies. At the banquet, I accidentally overheard a conversation between two guests who assumed that I did not understand their language. They discussed issues related to my work and shared their observations on how I can improve my productivity. And it was funny when I stepped into the conversation and started giving them advice based on their own recommendations. In one of the public places, I heard a conversation between a teacher and his student, who assumed that no one around them understood their language. The student openly talked about his learning difficulties, and the teacher gave him advice. Their surprise was immense when I joined the conversation and thanked the teacher for his valuable advice.